Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the OUCIP. You can see I'm sitting in the beautiful garden just outside the center, and we are privileged to have this morning, the third day of the conference, Living Dystopian, at the OUCIP, Osmani University Center for International Programs, a distinguished Delusian scholar and writer, Professor Taek-Gwang Lee, from the University of Kyung-hee in Seoul, South Korea. He's going to talk to us today about the virus and interpellation and about mechanical surveillance that has arrived hand in glove with the pandemic in the last year. Humanities and the role of the arts will figure prominently in the theoretical knowledges that he will share with us, the intricacies of theoretical knowledge that he will share with us in this presentation today, wherein he will probably outline for us a way forward, the way of resistance, the way of retaking, of remarking, of reterritorializing, to use a Delusian term, of the private spaces that have been so usurped in the last year, in the last decade perhaps. So without further ado, I look forward to, and I invite you once again to the presentation by Professor Taek-Gwang Lee from Kyung-hee University, South Korea. We will probably have a little tete-a-tete with Alex after he has finished his presentation, contra protocol of a plenary session, but then the digital platform does offer its own benefits. Welcome again, Alex, to this show, to our conference. Thank you for supporting Inspirare Arts Foundation. And we look forward to your presentation right now. Over to you, Alex.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
please.
Yeah, thank you
Over
for.
to you.
Okay, I'm Taek-Gwang Lee. I'm teaching in Kyung University in Seoul, South Korea. I'm very pleased and honored to have been invited to talk here. My topic is about the viral interpolation, ideology and pandemic, and then I want to actually focus on how this kind of COVID pandemic, influenced the way in which we think about the world. So I want to actually touch this problem. So a virus does infect not only our body but also our thought. That's my main topic I'm gonna deliver here, and then I want to actually, persuade you by saying this kind of a change of thought or some ideological effect is quite closely related to mechanical surveillance technology. So the impact of Black Death, for instance, was crucial to the European transition from the feudalism to capitalism, and fixed its effect in popular imagination. That is, in my opinion, cultural influence of pandemic to our imagination, and many narratives described bubonic plague in the past apocalyptically and showed its disastrous consequence. The virus change or the pandemic changed economic structure and at the same time people's perspectives on the world. The Black Death paved the way towards popular uprising linked to the socio-economic reconstruction in Europe. The demographic decline forced institutional change and the redistribution of the labor power in Europe in those days. So just like that, the COVID-19 pandemic also changed actually the fundamental structure of global capitalism today. And then I want to actually say this kind of change could be seen in our idea about privacy. That means actually enlightenment conceptualization of individuality is rapidly changed by the emergence of this kind of pandemic. So the meaning of privacy is obscure, of course, even not only in its daily uses, but also in its geographical reception. For instance, I found a sign in Delhi metro station which informed passengers that you are under surveillance. When I actually visited Delhi last year, I found out, this sign on any, the station, and you are under surveillance. The sign image, adopting a smiling cartoon character of female police officer, does not mean that you are controlled or have no privacy, but rather you are safe and that there is no crime. The sign is only for potential criminals, not for so-called good citizens who observed law. In this sense, surveillance, which actually showed this kind of sign, brings forth invisible separation within the community, which divides something into the legal and the illegal. The implication of a surveillance, therefore, is related to juridical subjectivity. Delhi's metro sign tells us about variability of privacy. That means variation, many actual kind of privacy. The concept of privacy is not singular, but rather plural, in that it rests upon geographical differences. Delhi's metro sign clearly show that. And then you can say there might be a cultural difference, or there might be, say, different, custom, something like that. Of course, these different standards of privacy have been occasionally criticized by Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For European or American visitors, the message in Delhi's metro station would be problematic and not fulfill their demand for privacy. However, for those local passengers, in particular female commuters, the word indicates the promise of security. Does this case show the other side of surveillance? Does the different significance of personal safety suggest tricky aspect to privacy? If surveillance presupposes legal approval, its existence implies disturbing truths. That is to say, people agree to hand over the right to control their data to the authority. This ambiguous aspect of surveillance would be voluntary compliance with surveillance that Michel Foucault, a French philosopher, points out in his analysis of power-knowledge relations. According to Foucault, power has no agency and no structure, but is pervasive. We do not obey the rule of authority, but rather are forced to follow the regime of truth. The regime does not mean sovereign acts of dominance, and then a coercion and facilitates constant flux and negotiations. Scientific discourse and institutions produce and sustain the regime of truth, and the educational system continuously reinforces its general politics. The regime of truth, according to Foucault, is the consequence of disciplinary power, such as Bentham's model of panopticon. The prisoner in the panopticon, self-monitoring, obeys rule of surveillance. The field of surveillance resides in the knowledge of the norms by which they know they are being watched. So this is actually the way in which surveillance works out. The visible authority forced the actual prisoner to follow the rule. That is normal, actually, the imagination about this kind of prison. But actually, there is no visible authority in prison. The prisoner voluntarily follow that kind of norm because they actually recognize they were watched by authority. However, what must be stressed here is that Foucault does not presuppose any transcendental form of Big Brother keeping close watch. His presupposition is that the principle of surveillance is founded on the self-knowledge of the observation, or self-knowing of the observation. That means we, the prisoner, will know they were watched by authority, but nobody knows, actually, they are watched by visible, the authority. Nobody knows that, but they actually believe or they imagine They were actually, watched by authority. That is a law. Those who are monitored want to be a right and good person. The rule of surveillance always already function as normative imperative sustaining our daily life. This is what I say, interpolation in Artisarian term. And Delhi's metro science convince us that obscurity of privacy is nothing less than the legitimacy of surveillance. So without surveillance or without legitimacy of surveillance, there is no, privacy. The legitimacy of the surveillance relies on two features of privacy: the need for privacy and the right to privacy. The former is related to classical sense of distinction between the private and public, while the latter roots in the historically developed concept of right to control personal information. Leading up to the 18th century in Europe, the right to privacy was a juridical issue, a question of right to open or read private letters. Legal issues gradually turned to question about collecting of personal information. It was colonization of America when the focus of privacy shifted onto the physical distance between the individual realms because the land ownership in the new continent flourished, a secure base for the privilege of privacy. By then, the home as such become. Uh, Actually, my point is that, and this concept went to the America and changed by actually the new economic condition. So by then, the home as such became seriously regarded as the first place of privacy in America, and this dramatic change has pinned down the concept of privacy until today. As historical byproduct, that means the privacy is a historical byproduct. There is tension between the need for privacy and the right to privacy. The latter was more and more extended. The latter has more and more extended its management of personal information since the rise of cognitive capitalism. According to Jan Bulea-Butang, cognitive capitalism is a paradigm or coherent research program that poses an alternative to post-Fordism. Cognitive capitalism can be grasped by transformation of three economic elements such as the form of accumulation, the mode of production, and the way of exploitation, and its main feature resides in the progress of a new technological the process since 1975. However, Muliputang makes sharp distinction between his concept of cognitive capitalism and the information society. For him, the term information society is misleading definition of the capitalist changeover embedded in the shift of three economic foundations. In this new type of capitalism, the object of accumulation consists mainly of knowledge, which becomes the basic source of value, as well as the principal location of the process of valorization. The knowledge-centered economy leads to reshaping the traditional division of labor and facilitates emergence of the horizontal structure enforced by data collecting systems like the internet. Furthermore, it is undeniable that cognitive capitalism paves the way towards surveillance capitalism. Along with the advancement of technological means, we are actually facing, with this kind of surveillance capitalism today, actually based on this sort of economic cognitive capitalism or some kind of economic transformation, to some point, surveillance capitalism can be called one of many features observed in cognitive capitalism. However, in my opinion, what makes difference between types of capitalism lies in the role of learning in accumulation. So learning is so important in this kind of new mode of capitalism. Consistent with the paradigm of cognitive capitalism, the production of knowledge through knowledge its exploitation of the invention power is crucial for its accumulation process. So, so-called creative industry, or some kind of actually, emphasis on the creation caused by this kind of transformation. Uh, in this procedure, knowledge takes the place of commodity. However, this replacement does not mean commodification of knowledge, but rather redesigning of property rights and expansion of possible wealth externally. For this reason, cognitive capitalism unveils the foundation of surveillance capitalism, the commodification of personal data. So what actually makes difference between cognitive capitalism and surveillance capitalism is that whether they are actually focused on knowledge or data. So surveillance capitalism quite emphasize the human data, based on our activity, our action or behavior, so-called the big data is mostly actually collect this kind of behavioral data. Data is the raw material for the accumulation of surveillance capitalism, and the extraction and analysis of human behavior are its imperative. So human behavior or observation of human behavior is so important in surveillance capitalism. So Google is the pioneering company par excellence, which invented the paradigm of surveillance capitalism, while Ford Motor Company and General Motors are chief progenitors of industrial capitalism. Shoshana Zuboff, Harvard, the professor who coined this term, points out that although surveillance capitalism does not abandon established capitalism laws such as competitive production, profit maximization, productivity, and growth, these earlier dynamics now operate in the context of new logic of accumulation that also introduces its own distinctive laws of motion. End quote. The new logic of accumulation, based on the economies of scale and the extraction of a behavioral surplus, gives rise to the necessary construction and modification of behavioral means that incorporate its machine intelligence-based means of production in a more complex system of action, and the ways in which the requirements of behavioral modification orient all operations toward totalities of information and control, creating the framework for unprecedented instrumentarian power and its societal implications. The shift from knowledge to data denotes the difference between cognitive capitalism and surveillance capitalism. Even though the arrival of surveillance capitalism does not mean the end of cognitive capitalism, as two types of accumulation systems coexist and cooperate, knowledge in cognitive capitalism is not a commodity as such, but a commodity structure to bring on the symbolic exchange of a non-exchangeable. Cognitive capitalism finds its origin in the increased significance of knowledge and its eruption driven by higher levels of education and the expansion of immaterial and intellectual labor. So more and more, actually, knowledge becomes a take actually the portion of this kind of accumulation. In this way, the main feature of a cognitive capitalism is embodied by qualitative dominance of living knowledge over dead knowledge. The initiative of knowledge built in living labor is the main trait of cognitive capitalism. This transformation sheds a light on decline of crisis of Smithian and Taylorian model of labor division and technical progress inherent in industrial capitalism. The mutation of accumulation is a fundamental, and so-called information technology revolution is not a single determinant for the mode of production. Technological progress is one of the elements to accelerate paradigmatic conversion to solve the crisis of capitalism. So even actually Piketty, pointed out this sort of innovation of technology produced more profit in capitalism, and the birth of cognitive capitalism effectuates death of working class and the expansion of knowledge by bringing in a cognitive dimension labor into the relation of production. Mass education and popular intellectuality are the prerequisites for the success of the new accumulation and gradual necessitate Taylorism and Fordism, the scientific theories of organizing labor and production as ways to confront the crisis. The ideological imperative of cognitive capitalism demands worker autonomy and then rendering of manual labor obsolete. For this reason, the spirit of cognitive capitalism springs out from the obsession of self-directed learning. So you must study, by yourself. That is actually the model of actually the workers and this kind of surveillance capitalism. So according to Malcolm Knowles, self-learning is, quote, a process by which individuals take initiative with or without assistance of others in diagnosing their learning needs, formulating learning goals, identifying human and material resources for learning, and evaluating learning outcomes, end quote. The duty of self-learning constitutes the ethics of new Protestantism in the face of cognitive capitalism. It seems to herald the return of the 19th century self-help maxim and industrial capitalism. To some degree, the model of self-learning and knowledge-based accumulation is akin to a form of popular Stoicism which encouraged the mass self-guided improvement for individual welfare and well-being. Surveillance is internal logic of modernity. What we newly faced up to within the current phase of surveillance capitalism is the rise of mechanical surveillance. Mechanical surveillance is a machine-based surveillance, lacking human agency. So actually, they don't, need the human being, to control the, other. Artificial intelligence is kind of replacement to such a human agency. So AI is one of those technical instruments to set forth mechanical surveillance. Automation is the condition of mechanical surveillance. As Foucault points out, the structure of a panopticon is the origin of modern surveillance system. The central power controls population and modifies their behavior. However, it is not the structure itself, but the norms imposed by omnipresent gaze of surveillance, which enforces us to alter our manner. So Galahad in Kingsman, the Secret Service, is a British movie, teaches manner make the man. The primitive violence of lesson is invisible when the mechanical surveillance sets out. The silent locus of the subject within the network of computing surveillance is a venue of resistance. The subject is always on the verge of danger and to push the use of technology at its limit. The pandemic situation proves that surveillance capitalism is sufficiently adaptive and subtle to sustain its own system dynamics. So it shows that, the ambivalence of surveillance technology, in that people do not want to neglect surveillance, but rather strongly demand the authority put their security under constant surveillance. This excessive drive brings forth vulnerable point of technology and the minor use of techniques against its instrumental purpose. So actually, this is what I want to say. Um, actually, many people actually believe that this technology would replace the human being, and AI will actually take over the place of human or something like that. So thing is that actually the technology modified our behavior. All right, actually this technology actually changed the way of thinking. There is a very ideological actual effect will be caused by kind of advancement of ideology, you know and then but actually the thing is that this ideology is actualized by technology. That is what I say. So I don't say uh, technology ideology. I don't say like that. What I mean actually, the ideology is the the how can I say, just the realized by this kind of technological transformation, or some, in other words, we can say this is kind of new actually the normativity, the which was imposed on our own new behavior. So the COVID-19 pandemic does not mean the crisis of capitalism, but rather compounds existing problems within the capitalist mode of production. So it wouldn't actually cause the crisis of capitalism or some end of capitalism directly, but actually it compounds that. Those the crisis we already experienced before this COVID-19 pandemic. So the precarious status of essential workers, regardless of their living condition, has been worse off. In contrast, unrestricted capitalist accumulation and valorizing the market above everything else has been more efficient and has exacerbated social inequality. These contradictory consequences of a pandemic situation prove that nature of capitalism does not need workers for its completion. The pandemic serves as not so much end of capitalism, but as another moment to sustain its paradox. Indeed, what is being observed at the moment is the more traumatic experiences of capitalist restructuring. Some critics take the concept of shock doctrine to explain how capitalism survives through the disastrous process. Naomi Klein's theory of the shock doctrine, her critique of a Chicago school, is based on the assumption that human cost of shock therapy, or some shock doctrine, is tactically designed to control the working class. The ground of the shock doctrine is undoubtedly the human psychical realm and essentially requires production social relations. However, the current prevalence of disaster capitalism seems to achieve its culmination by erasing the working class presence, as is discussed. It does not mean the removal of the workers, but the modification of work as such. This is what I want to say. They don't want to actually remove the workers. They don't want to actually take workers away from this kind of production, but rather they actually modify the work. They actually changed ideology of work. So this transformation dramatically evolves in the idea of a mechanical management based on surveillance technology in this pandemic. In other words, the mechanization of work, the perversion of Taylorism, reconstructs the labor forces, the fundamentals, and drives each worker to be a part of a mechanism. This is actually what I'm concerning now. The financial bull market on technology investment precipitates this shift further and reformulates the distribution of labor. I would call this inversion of capitalism the very essence of pure capitalism, the free economic system that encouraged the individual's voluntary competition to produce So actually, I found this article, the Chinese article titled "My Boss is Not Human," published in Kaijing. It means economics, and then Chinese the economic magazine proves how this mechanical surveillance recognizes the workplace. So, according to a report, many Chinese enterprises have adopted artificial intelligence for more efficient and standardized the management. So actually, they created new actual standard of management by introducing this AI to their own company. The new system works with more than 20 surveillance cameras all over the workplaces and records every worker's behaviors and activity according to that article. An electronic roll call at entrance is necessary to identify each people and monitor the group. This algorithmic uh, scrutiny and the mechanical transformation of all human action into a data. This is the actual role of algorithm or function of AI. Totalizes the whole process of work like a single machine. The monitoring camera transcribes workers' performance per second, and the central operating system checks up its efficiency. So it's a whole large company what the building as such, turned to be a huge machine, in which just like a Snowpiercer, the movie, each, person actually works, as kind of, part of the machine. So each component is designed as prescribed processing time by the algorithm, and the intelligent task distribution system will recognize and facilitate due sequence of workers' actions. The electronic time attendance system refines the check-in procedures previously set at company gate. So when actually in the morning, get into the company, they would be actually set on this kind of system like this. Workers must swipe their cards if they leave the workplace. If they are absent at their seats for more than 15 minutes, the recorded data will be submitted to a central operating system. There is no actual human being there, only machine operating system, and the sum of the salary will be automatically deducted from the end of the month. This is very, the creepy story of a management. My point concerning this Chinese version of Taylor's scientific management does not lie in the fact that George Orwell's imagination of Big Brother has come to be realized, but rather the aim of the administration is to modify the human behaviors for the algorithmic mechanism. So, in my opinion, this is the purpose of algorithm. They want to actually prove that we don't need actually human power to control human being. And then this concept of algorithm, well, in my term, mechanical surveillance, works like that. Based on the belief, we don't need actually human being, to control human beings. So there is no such a thing like a big brother in the system, but the technological stupidity to control the workers by simplifying their actions. Why do I actually put this term stupidity? Actually, if you wanna find out the information on internet, please Google your name on it. Search your name on the Google. You could find out, many stupid answers about you come up. That means that Google does not know who you are. Does not know what you like. And what actually you are, what kind of person you are, something like that. Google has no information about that. As far as you don't give them your own personal data. This is actually the principle of technology, like Google. So any digressive and unpredicted move does not seem to be allowed in this process. So this stupidity, that means Google actually is stupid, but we must actually, adapt, ourselves onto that kind of stupidity. We must, we are actually enforced to follow that kind of Google stupidity. Otherwise, you cannot, be regarded as kind of a normal person. You will be actually the old-fashioned, person if you don't use that Google. If you don't actually know how to use the Google, you might be blamed by your colleagues, your friend, your children. Just like that, you are a little bit stupid, or you are a little bit, the behind the fashion, something like that. But this is exactly what I mean. Ideological, the function of technology. You know. So, however, the workers followed rules not because the system tightly governs them, but because the norm of new scientific management, the command of mechanical surveillance, forces them to obey the axioms of mechanism. Therefore, the algorithmic organization of a workplace is not crucial factor in the new management. The problem is that there must be an invisible decision maker behind automatic system in solving any accidental and predictable outcome, even though the algorithmic mechanism operates without presence of human boss in the venue. No human boss. But we actually believe some actually the authority, you know, is watching us, and or we actually believe that somebody must watch us. You know, this is, in my opinion, the void of surveillance or vantage point of surveillance. The void of surveillance, the subjective articulation, is always already included in the mechanism and preserve locus of resistance. That's why, because this surveillance always already, preserve that kind of void. All right, or if you like, I would say this kind of place of poetical resistance, or place of intuition, place of spirituality. Many actually the so-called humanity will be inscribed within this kind of void of machine or void of mechanism. uh, Done. This is my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was wonderful to hear you parsing through the different aspects of surveillance and of privacy. It's normal, you might say, protocol not to ask questions after a plenary, but I am very tempted to ask you one or two very interesting questions. You see, privacy, the other thing that was of prime interest, especially with the view from India, for example, with the pandemic raging through
Yeah,
the 2020 year 2020, was also the question of clemency. You might say. I mean, it's a planetary thing. I mean, you talk about corporatism, you talk about the word clemency comes to the fore a great deal, especially under these strange circumstances. Global economy under strains, but then again, there is something to be case to be about clemency as well. In a more general sense, since you are into these matters so interestingly, I would want you to say a few words about clemency as well in a year like 2020 and how it dovetails in with those concepts about the lifeless algorithms that you talked about, the MNCs, the corporatisms, a general dehumanization that we talk about, where everything is down to a machine, the machine becomes an ideal.
yeah,
Lives are simplified, the complexity that is the human factor in our lives is simplified, is erased. So could
yeah,
you talk a little bit about clemency also in the light of all these developments in 2020, Alex?
yeah. So actually, the that kind of the privacy problem is definitely related to the legitimacy. You know, the if you actually want to say authority control you, that means the authority gained that kind of legitimacy, and where is that legitimacy comes up? Definitely is in republic. in the modern state is a people's agreement.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, so that's what I'm going to say.
Yeah, and the other thing that came out very interestingly was also this idea of the virus's interpolation. You know, of course, you are trying to bring in a stream of ideas, of course, originating in Althusser and flowing
Yeah.
right through even writers and theorists like Deleuze, for example. Especially in third world countries. Of course, we are looking at India and the third world countries, and how,
Yeah.
and you see, privacy is often being used as a ruse to actually invade that privacy. You know, that's what we have seen. You know, privacy has taken a huge hit in the year 2020. You know, what was the private sphere? You talked about the public and the private, the classical distinction between the public and the private at the very beginning of your talk. You know, that exactly has been used by regimes across the world. I'm not just talking about India or not just talking about South Asia. It's been used across the world. I mean, like, look, take the case of America, for example. I mean, it's one of the prime examples of that. And, you know, it's been taken to shreds, actually. I mean, how would you respond to that, in the light of what has happened in the last year or so?
So actually, yeah, the very good point you actually raised, and in my opinion, this actual pandemic effect is definitely mostly the focused on the transformation of the capitalism. You know, that means the industrial structure is changed by this. That's why they need, the people's agreement to take kind of legitimacy. And this pandemic, in my opinion, is used for such a, excuse, why we actually changed our life. But actually, we would, listen to that kind of ecological, demand. But most of actually, the thing happen these days, you would know that, the state try to control the people, by in terms of, the viral, pandemic, something like that. And then they try to actually put the people in lockdown, something like that. So, I think actually that's why we need to think about the resistance again, at the moment, resistance does not mean simply actually the demonstration on the street, but also your own, actually the believe in some kind of, the void of surveillance. You don't need actually the abate, under that kind of surveillance. You should actually keep yourself, away from surveillance, and then make actually the lots of different use of technology. All right, just like this, we use this technology, but actually this technology also will be used, by authority kind of surveillance instrument. But we must actually intervene this kind of actually the authorities use of technology, and we must use this technology different way. The artwork, and then in my opinion, also the artistic activity is one of that. The also art is a technique, and then we must actually the use the technology in terms of technique. It's not kind of such an instrumental purpose. That's my answer.
Thank you, Alex. I mean, that's a very interesting point to make about, and I really like that very much, about art being the kind of technique, the technical aspect that can be, in fact, spearhead the resistance, as you say, which is very interesting because, it reminds me of Jacques Rancier's theory about partage.
Yeah.
And how, artists have a very important role in this, you might say, solidification of opinion.
Exactly.
Opinion, as you said, radicalism on the streets is not all, but a more concerted effort is required, in fact, to counteract the technological and other digital advances, which obviously are the fronts for more political and, you might say, on a more humanitarian kind
Yeah.
of ground, the taking away of the rights of man. And in fact, the pandemic could so easily be called in several nations, I think, the national malady. Because we began with the Benedict Anderson's idea about the nation being such a wonderful thing and being
Yeah.
forged and all that. And now this very idea of the national is being used against its own people. The nation is using it against its own people. The national malady, the national policy, and the surrendering of the private spaces. That's what you talked about so brilliantly in today's.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Alex. I would really like to talk to you more about the pandemic and poetry, of course. One of our common passions, I guess. So thank you so much for joining us this morning, the third day of the conference. from faraway Seoul. Have a good day, keep well, and I'll be talking to you more about different things that engage us, things in the world. Thank you so much, Alex, for joining us today.
Thank you very
Ladies and
much.
gentlemen, Professor Alex Taek-Gwang Lee. Thank you.
Thank
Professor
you.
Alex Taek-Gwang Lee from Seoul, who has joined us. Thank you so much, Alex.
Yeah, stay safe.